A 23-year-old guitarist with 180,000 YouTube subscribers walked into Denmark Street Music in London on a Tuesday afternoon and saw an old man quietly tuning a Stratocaster in the corner. He saw content. "No offense, mate, but that's a vintage guitar, way above your level. Maybe check the beginner section. We'll film it. Old school versus new school." His friend pointed the phone. What Jake did not know, and what Raymond Cross, who had been working at this shop for 35 years and had sold Eric Clapton 8 guitars across 3 decades, was watching from behind the counter and choosing not to reveal because the next few minutes were going to be the finest thing he had witnessed in 35 years of retail, was that the old man in the plain dark jacket was Eric Clapton. Subscribe and drop a comment right now. What Eric Clapton did when Jake challenged him, and what Jake said when the room had gone quiet, is the reason the shop framed the photograph instead of deleting it. Denmark Street had been Eric Clapton's street long before it was anyone else's. In the early 1960s, when Eric Clapton was a teenager from Ripley, Surrey, making his first serious attempts at becoming the guitarist Eric Clapton could hear in the records Eric Clapton had been listening to obsessively since 1958. Denmark Street was the center of the London music industry, a short road in Soho lined with music publishers, recording studios, and guitar shops that held instruments a young player might spend months saving toward. Eric Clapton had come here as a teenager. Eric Clapton had played in the windows of these shops. Eric Clapton had returned, periodically across 6 decades, with the specific quiet loyalty that people show to the places where something important began. On this particular Tuesday in September 2018, Eric Clapton had come to Denmark Street Music for the same reason Carlos Santana had once gone to a guitar store on Hollywood Boulevard, for strings, and because the shop was nearby, and because being in a room full of guitars was never entirely without pleasure regardless of how many thousands of concerts had intervened since the first one. Eric Clapton had entered wearing a plain dark jacket and jeans, had found the strings, paid for them, and was about to leave when a 1960s-era Fender Stratocaster hanging on the wall near the exit had slowed the walk toward the door. The guitar was a sunburst, its finish worn in the specific places where 40 years of playing had removed the lacquer. Eric Clapton had taken it down from the wall and sat on one of the testing stools and begun to tune it with the automatic, unself-conscious precision of someone for whom tuning a guitar was as unconsidered as tying a shoelace. Raymond Cross had been working at Denmark Street Music since 1983. Raymond was 68 years old, a former session musician who had spent 4 decades managing this shop and maintaining the specific accumulated knowledge of a person who had worked in the same specialist environment for 35 years. Raymond knew the guitar he had sold to which musician in which year. Raymond knew the handwriting on the receipts in the folders going back to the 1980s. Raymond had sold Eric Clapton his first guitar at this shop in 1984, a replacement for something Eric Clapton had been looking for specifically, and had sold Eric Clapton 7 more across the years since. Raymond recognized Eric Clapton across a shop the way you recognize someone you have known for decades, immediately, without effort, with the particular calm of recognition that arrives before conscious thought. Raymond was behind the counter when Jake came in. Jake had been making YouTube content since he was 19. His channel, built on technical precision and the specific performance of virtuosity that the algorithm rewarded with clicks and engagement, had reached 180,000 subscribers. Jake had developed a playing style built on speed, sweep arpeggios, tapping, the kind of flashy technical display that generated views and comments, and the exaggerated enthusiasm of an audience that had been trained to equate difficulty with quality. Jake regarded 180,000 subscribers as validation of his musical ability rather than what it actually was, which was validation of his ability to generate visually impressive content for an audience that rewarded spectacle over substance. Jake came to music shops on Tuesdays with 3 friends, all of them building their own channels, all of them filming content by playing as fast and as loudly as possible on the most expensive instruments in the shop. The older man in the corner tuning a vintage Stratocaster with unhurried precision was, to Jake, content opportunity. Jake approached with his friends. One of the friends had the phone up already. "No offense, mate, but that's a vintage guitar. Way above your level. Maybe check the beginner section. We'll film it. Old school versus new school. Comments are going to be wild." Eric Clapton looked up from the guitar. Eric Clapton's expression did not change. Eric Clapton did not show irritation, embarrassment, or the defensive pride of someone whose authority has been questioned. Eric Clapton showed something that Jake, at 23, had not yet encountered in sufficient quantity to recognize: patience. The specific, unhurried patience of a person who has heard every possible variation of this kind of comment across 57 years, who has learned that the most effective response is not an argument but a demonstration, and who has had approximately 57 years to develop the demonstration. Eric Clapton smiled briefly. Eric Clapton set the Stratocaster carefully on the stand beside the stool. Eric Clapton stood up and stepped aside. Behind the counter, Raymond Cross uncrossed and recrossed his arms. Raymond leaned back slightly against the shelving. Raymond said nothing. Raymond was not going to say anything. Raymond had been waiting 35 years for an afternoon like this, and was not going to interfere with it. Jake took the stool. Jake grabbed a different guitar from the wall, a modern Les Paul, not the Stratocaster, plugged into the nearest amplifier, cranked the gain, and played. Jake's technique was, by any objective measure, genuinely impressive. The speed was real, the arpeggios were clean, the tapping patterns were practiced and controlled. His friends filmed from multiple angles and provided the commentary their audience expected. After 2 minutes, Jake looked over at Eric Clapton, who was standing quietly near the string display, watching. "Your turn, Grandpa. Old school versus new school. Show us what you've got. We'll put the whole thing on YouTube. I'll be nice about it in the edit." Eric Clapton looked at Jake. Eric Clapton looked at the phones. Eric Clapton looked at Raymond behind the counter. Raymond gave a nod so small it was almost invisible. The nod contained 35 years of accumulated patience arriving at a single point of permission. Eric Clapton walked to the stool. Eric Clapton picked up the 1960s Stratocaster. Eric Clapton plugged it into the amplifier. Eric Clapton reached for the volume knob and turned it down, not to a whisper, but to a level considerably below the ear-splitting setting Jake had been using. Eric Clapton adjusted the tone control, rolling off a fraction of the treble and adding a warmth to the sound that Jake's settings had not allowed for. These adjustments took approximately 8 seconds. Jake's friends pointed their phones and waited, still smiling. Then Eric Clapton closed both eyes. Eric Clapton played one note, a single sustained E held with a vibrato so specific and so emotionally complete that it appeared to alter the acoustic character of the room. The note was not loud, the note was not fast, it required no particular finger speed and no technique that Jake would have recognized as advanced. What it required was something that Jake had not yet developed, the understanding of what a single note can contain when the person playing it has spent 57 years learning to put things into notes. The note arrived in Denmark Street Music and spoke with the clarity and weight of 57 years of daily conversation with the instrument. Every concert, every recording, every session in every studio, every moment when Eric Clapton had stood with a guitar and tried to say something that words couldn't reach. Jake's grin froze. The note was still sustaining. Eric Clapton's vibrato, that specific, unhurried shimmer that guitar players and critics and fans had been writing about since the mid-1960s, was doing what it always did, carrying more emotional information per second than most musicians put into an entire performance. The note was not a display. The note was a statement. It was the difference between watching someone run very fast and watching someone move in a way that makes you stop and reconsider what movement is for. Within 20 seconds, every person who had been playing a guitar in Denmark Street Music had stopped, not because anyone had asked them to, because something was happening in the room that required a different quality of attention than playing. 3 musicians at the back of the shop set down their instruments without appearing to notice they had done so. A woman examining acoustic guitars near the window walked toward the sound with the involuntary motion of someone responding to gravity. Raymond Cross, behind the counter, was very still. Eric Clapton followed the single note with the opening phrase of Layla, not the full song, just the first melodic idea, the descending figure that had been one of the most recognizable guitar phrases in the world since 1970. Eric Clapton played it at the tempo of something being considered rather than performed, each note placed not where technique dictated but where the music needed it, with the silence between the notes treated as deliberately as the notes themselves. Within 20 seconds, every other guitar in Denmark Street Music had gone quiet. A man near the back of the shop said it first. He had been a customer at Denmark Street Music for 20 years, and he said it the way you say something when the identification arrives before the conscious decision to speak. That is Eric Clapton. That is Layla. The information moved through the shop in approximately 4 seconds. Jake's face underwent a process that his friends, watching the footage later, described as a wave, the recognition arriving from the forehead downward. Jake was 23 years old. Jake had been playing guitar since he was 13. There was a specific reason Jake had asked for a guitar when he was 13, and the specific reason was a poster on his bedroom wall, a photograph of a man playing a Stratocaster on a stage, a poster Jake's older brother had brought home and put on the wall without ceremony, and underneath the poster the words, Eric Clapton, Unplugged, 1992. Jake had learned Layla before Jake had learned any other complete song. Jake had watched the tutorial 17 times, had played the opening riff until the fingertips were too sore to continue, and then played it again the next day. The man whose playing had been the reason Jake had learned to play, whose recording Jake had used as the template for the first thing Jake had ever seriously attempted on a guitar, was now sitting on a stool in Soho, having just played the opening phrase of Layla to 20 people who had stopped everything to hear it. Jake's guitar was still in his hands. Jake appeared to have forgotten this. Eric Clapton opened both eyes and looked at Jake. "Play with me," Eric Clapton said. Not a command, an offer. The same offer that extraordinary musicians have made to younger ones across the entire history of music. The offer that is the most direct method of teaching because what can be demonstrated in real time cannot be argued with. Jake stared at the guitar in his hands. Jake stared at Eric Clapton. "I told you you were too old," Jake said. His voice was not quite steady. "I told you that guitar was above your level. I filmed it. I'm so sorry." Eric Clapton looked at him. "I know," Eric Clapton said. "Now pick up the guitar and play." They played together for 10 minutes in Denmark Street Music on a Tuesday afternoon that nobody in the shop had expected to be anything other than ordinary. Jake played the way Jake always played, with speed, with technical precision, with the vocabulary of 10 years of practice. But something had changed from the previous 2 minutes. The speed was present, but the point of it had shifted. Jake was listening more than performing, for the first time in the session, and perhaps for the first time in a public playing situation in his 10-year career. Eric Clapton answered each phrase Jake produced with something slower, simpler, and more emotionally complete. Not to diminish what Jake was doing, but to demonstrate through the most direct and irrefutable method available, the difference between playing at someone and playing with someone, between using music to display what you are capable of and using it to say something that the person beside you and the people around you actually need to hear. When they stopped, the 20 people in Denmark Street Music produced the kind of response that small rooms produce when something large has happened in them. Jake set down the guitar. Jake extended his hand. "I owe you something honest," Jake said. "I came in here to film a joke. I filmed something I didn't expect." A pause. "Today is the first time in 10 years of playing guitar that I understood what the guitar is actually for." Eric Clapton shook the hand. "You have speed," Eric Clapton said. "Speed gets you noticed. Feeling gets you remembered. You cannot manufacture feeling from technique. You have to earn it. But you have the technique. That's the starting point, not the destination." Eric Clapton set the Stratocaster back on the wall where it had been. The rest is listening. It always was. 3 weeks later, Jake posted the complete footage under the title, "The Day I Told Eric Clapton He Was Too Old for That Guitar." The video was watched 11 million times in its first 2 weeks and became the most shared guitar video in the United Kingdom that year. The comment section was divided between people who roasted Jake for his arrogance and people who praised him for posting the footage unedited rather than deleting it. Jake's introduction, which he recorded in a single take and which his friends told him he should rewrite to be less self-incriminating, was simple and honest. "I came into this shop to make a joke at an old man's expense. I made the most significant mistake of my 10 years of playing. I have not edited the footage. This is everything that happened from the beginning." Jake's channel went from 180,000 to 900,000 subscribers in the following year. More significantly, Jake's playing changed. The speed was still present. Jake had not abandoned 10 years of technical development, but the speed was accompanied now by longer-held notes, more deliberate silences between phrases, and a quality of musical listening that his audience noticed within weeks and began to describe in the comment sections with words that had not previously appeared under Jake's videos: feeling, soul, emotion, depth. Jake had gone into Denmark Street Music on a Tuesday afternoon intending to generate content. Jake had generated something considerably more durable than content. Jake had generated one real moment instead. Raymond Cross has a framed photograph near the entrance of Denmark Street Music. Two men on testing stools, one old and one young, both holding guitars, caught in the middle of something that neither of them had planned. Beneath the photograph, a small card in Raymond's handwriting. The afternoon someone told Eric Clapton his guitar was above his level. Denmark Street Music, September 2018. Subscribe and come back.